McLaren GT is a crucial model for the working maker, but it's far more of a McLaren than a GT. If you want one, you'll be fine with that.
Can a McLaren ever be a proper GT? You know, like a Bentley Continental GT, an Aston Martin DB11 or a Ferrari Roma? Well, this McLaren GT is probably about as close to being a Grand Tourer as any pure sports car model from the Woking brand is likely to get. It's aimed at customers who like the company's old 570 GT but wanted something slightly more practical and luxurious, and maybe even a bit faster. The McLaren GT was launched in 2019, then updated 3 years on to create the car we're looking at here. The recent changes are minor, a little extra refinement, lighter dihedral doors and some rationalised trim options. Otherwise, things are much as before. Whereas this model's 570 GT predecessor was merely an adapted Sport Series model with a bespoke glass hatch and altered suspension, this GT is much more its own car. It has its own unique bodywork, its own specification of carbon fibre monocell, and even its own version of the 4-litre V8 engine used in the 750S. Plus, the brakes, steering, stability system and the tyres have all been bespoke tuned for this model. Despite all this effort, the GT is a model that's become a little forgotten in the McLaren lineup amidst all the hype surrounding much pricier designs from the brand like the 765 LT and the V6 hybrid Artura. But it's arguably more significant than either of those two cars for Woking's bottom line. To find out why, you're going to need the industry's most comprehensive review, the Car and Driving Road Test. You can't help but feel a frisson of excitement when readying yourself to drive a McLaren, but it's tempered slightly here by advanced knowledge that this one's trying to be something that no previous model from the brand has ever tried to be, at least to some extent, a practical kind of sports car. Not that it looks that way from the outside, or feels that way when you lift the huge dihedral door to get in. Behind the thin-rimmed race-style wheel, it also seems pretty focused, especially when you thumb the red central starter button and the exterior picture of the car on the instrument panel is replaced by a big virtual rev counter dial, most of which is rather emotively coloured red. All of which happens as the big 4-litre V8 springs into life with a guttural roar. So, you're ready. But for what? McLaren design chief Rob Melville says that this would be the McLaren James Bond would drive, which isn't quite true, of course. In the original Ian Fleming books, 007's car of choice was a 1930 blower Bentley, which is exactly the kind of car this McLaren GT is trying not to be. Yes, as with that model and its modern equivalents like the Bentley Continental GT Speed and the Aston Martin DB11, it's marketed as a grand touring super sports car. But unlike those rivals, it has the weight and the chassis of a far more track-orientated super sports car. Simply one with an extra nod to luggage space. Perhaps Bond would have liked that, more room for all those gadgets. He also would have appreciated the fundamental concept that how you're able to go fast has a major bearing on how fast you're able to go. Just about all the class rivals we can think of that would closely rival a McLaren GT on track are cars that'll probably stay moored in their owners' oak-framed garages for most of the time because they're simply too impractical to use for anything but a quick blast or a track day. Of course, the concept of a move towards a dash of practicality in a super sports car isn't new. McLaren itself had a half-hearted go at it with this model's 570 GT predecessor, and today there are many who would say that the only slightly more expensive Ferrari Roma meets it more accurately. But there are differences. The 570 GT was just a 570S with a glazed rear hatch, and a Roma isn't particularly practical and doesn't share all that much with the character of more track-focused Ferraris further up the range, in the way that this GT very much does. The basis of the suspension, the monocell chassis, the steering and the 4-litre V8 engine are much the same as with McLaren's rather spectacular 750S, as is the way that drive goes to the rear axle through a 7-speed dual-clutch paddle shift gearbox and an open differential. Yet at the same time, this GT is also, unlike its predecessor, very much its own car. Indeed, McLaren claims over 60% of its parts are completely new. Smaller turbochargers and high compression pistons lower total output to 611 bhp in comparison to the 750S, but over 95% of that is available from just 3,000 RPM, so mid-range acceleration is still savagely quick. Aided by launch control, 62 miles an hour from rest is dispatched in just 3.1 seconds, with 124 miles an hour flashing by in 9 seconds en route to a top speed rated at 203 miles an hour. So, as you probably expected, it's frantically fast. More important though is the news that this GT still drives like a McLaren. Of course, there's not the insane top end you get on a 740 brake horsepower 750S, nor do you get that car's sophisticated interlinked damping hydraulics. But the suspension control software is the same, as are the double-valved adaptive dampers, which use the brand's predictive, proactive damping control system that anticipates bumps before you reach them. And the bespoke carbon fibre monocell 2T super lightweight chassis is pretty much as stiff as the structure you'll find in any other McLaren. As a result, this car is, like its Woking brand stablemates, a razor-sharp driving device, clearly lacking the compromises in grip, traction and poise that by comparison you'd have in a rival DB11 or Continental GT. Yes, body control is slightly softer than in a 750S or an Artura, but certainly not by enough to make this a GT in the proper sense of the word. You'll want to know about the V8 engine, installed out back for the kind of perfect mid-mounted configuration that some rivals do without. For the GT, it's designated M840TE, and it's optimised to deliver its 630 Nm of torque in a seamless, relentless rush with a remarkable power-to-weight ratio of 405 brake horsepower per tonne. You'd hope for an appropriate orchestral accompaniment to that, but as it turns out, despite the standard sports exhaust, if you've driven other super sports cars in this category, you might not be immediately blown away by the aural fireworks on display. But things start to improve in this regard once you begin to stretch this power plant a bit. True, you don't get the red line chasing crescendo of an Audi R8's big V10, or the astonishing punch delivered by the variable vane turbos in a Porsche 911 Turbo, but there's certainly a unique character here. Hard acceleration accompanied by an aggressive turbo whoosh and a fruity rasp delivered at the top end. As you might expect, if you're familiar with cars of this kind, much about the engine note will be dictated by your choice of driving mode, which means that before driving this car, you'll need to get yourself familiar with the workings of this active dynamics panel down here in the lower part of the center console. Press this active button and you'll be able to access the settings of these two rotary controllers, one designated H for handling, the other branded P for powertrain, and each has 3 modes: C for comfort, S for sport and T for track. Sport mode adopts the brand's momentary ignition spark cut technology, originally engineered for F1 racing, which improves gearshift times and provides a more engaging mechanical feel. Track mode goes a stage further, maximising gearshift performance with McLaren's innovative inertia push system, a technology that harnesses the built-up kinetic energy of the flywheel to deliver a torque impulse as the next gear is engaged. ensuring absolutely no let-up in acceleration during upshifts. As well as varying the exhaust note, these various settings affect stability control thresholds, ride quality and gear change timings for that paddle shift auto transmission we mentioned, which you'll want to control via these big shifters behind the chunky wheel. Interestingly, one thing the various drive modes don't affect is steering feel, which works via a single immersive McLaren designated setting. In its softest comfort setting, this GT really is quite impressively supple, riding the bumps better than some fast family hatchbacks we've driven, which is one of the things that makes this car a much better prospect for long distances than some of its rivals. There's a little more refinement than with this Woking maker's other models too, thanks to various cabin insulation measures and noise-cancelling tyres. But again, predictably, the improvement isn't really enough to make the car feel anywhere near Bentley-like in highway cruising. There's about 12 decibels more cabin din, the legal limit, than you'd get in that comparable Continental GT speed model. This GT is surprisingly good at short commuting trips though, aided by the fact that with the standard nose lift system in play, which raises the front suspension by 40mm at speeds of up to 37 miles an hour, there's as much clearance for speed humps, up to 130mm, as you get in a comparably fast but conventionally based high-performance model like, say, a Mercedes AMG C63 Saloon. For other reasons too, this GT is a much easier urban partner than many of its rivals, helped by the fact that the throttle pedal isn't unduly sensitive, and all-round rear three-quarter vision is much better than the low-slung styling leads you to expect. To begin with, you worry a bit about the width of the car, but it soon becomes evident that you don't need to, because the precise yet feelsome steering system we mentioned earlier makes the car so easy to place on the road. Talking of steering, McLaren continues to reject the all-electric setup that most rivals now use in favour of an older tech but brilliantly responsive electro-hydraulic system that really sets the standard in this segment, making you utterly confident about throwing this GT into a corner, at which point you're aided by a grippy set of bespoke Pirelli P0 tyres. Braking performance is equally sensational. The standard carbon ceramic system featuring 390mm discs at the front with 380mm discs at the rear. These will arrest the car from 62 miles an hour in just 32 metres. So yes, this is a proper McLaren. Whether it's a proper GT though is far more open to question. You'd know this GT as a McLaren at first glance, but perhaps a slightly less aggressive looking one than in this case is only available as a coupe. It's based around a stretched version of the brand's usual Sport Series monocell chassis that delivers a 114mm body length increase over the 750S in order to provide for this model's required extra boot space. Nothing in the design of the GT is without purpose. Everything is for a reason. Invisible to the eye, the airflow is managed, manipulated and channeled around, across and through the car by exact shapes, creases, curves and ducts in the bodywork. Interestingly, the designers claim that this model is the most aerodynamic series production car the company makes, helped by a teardrop-shaped glasshouse, encircled by a dark collar at the belt line which tapers back into glazed C-pillars. That's where you'll find a huge mesh-covered flank intake on each side, plus a little further back, an intricate cooling channel for the engine on each side on top of the rear haunches. As we've already suggested, at almost 4.7 metres with extended front and rear overhangs, the GT is longer than is traditional for a McLaren supercar. It's the longest car the company makes, but there's a practical 10-degree approach angle at the front and surprisingly generous underbody clearance. This solid composite roof can be replaced, as here, with a panoramic glass roof with privacy glass, and the big wheels are 20 inches at the front and 21 inches at the rear, both rims clad with grippy Pirelli P0 rubber. The width and stance of the car are emphasised at the front by the hammerhead line that runs horizontally across the nose and draws the eye out to the sides of the vehicle. The front splitter echoes this elegant line and generates peak aerodynamic pressure at its centre point, guiding airflow over the bonnet's contours, under the vehicle and into 4 low-temperature radiator ducts located in the front bumper. Dual-like LED headlights include sequential LED indicators, automatic rain and light sensors, and a tourist function to quickly adjust the light beam for right or left-hand drive territories. Static adaptive LED headlights automatically direct the light beam in line with steering inputs, improving visibility through corners without the need for heavier electric motors. At the rear is a full-length glazed tailgate, its trailing edge punctuated by an integral fixed rear wing. The wing's positioned above an open area at the back of the car. Blade LED tail lights are seamlessly integrated, the blade's ultra-slim design also aiding heat extraction by increasing the open area. And as usual, what's more important, of course, is what you can't see. In this case, this GT model's unique monocell 2T super lightweight chassis. Carbon fibre fabricated, of course, as has been the chassis of every McLaren model right back to the MP4 F1 car of 1981. Time to take a look inside. Now, giving an exotic feel, the Marque's usual dihedral doors have been retained, as has McLaren's usual reluctance to provide proper handles for them, so there'll be a bit of fumbling around the first time that you attempt to gain access. As part of the updates made to this car, these doors have been optimised for use in tight parking spaces, and McLaren says each one's also been lightened, supposedly to make entry and exit easier, though this still isn't the most straightforward car to get in and out of. The door sill rises sharply alongside the seats, but is thinner and lower than is the case with the brand's other models, sweeping downwards to try and widen a door aperture, rather restricted by the positioning of the A-pillar. And once you lower yourself behind the wheel, well, there's the usual McLaren driving position, legs outstretched and arms bent, with the brake pedal set perfectly and a thin-rimmed race-style steering wheel cleansed of the usual buttons. The finishing surrounding all of this is quite opulent, but despite that, your first impressions here aren't really of any kind of GT. This is clearly the cockpit of a super sports car, even though you sit a couple of inches higher than you would in other McLaren models. A fractional 5mm wheelbase increase over the 750S and the old 570 GT doesn't make much difference to cabin space, so put all the Grand Tourer marketing out of your mind and instead revel in the fact that all the essential ingredients for focused high-performance driving are here, including intuitively located controls and excellent forward visibility past slim windscreen pillars. There's also a near-perfect seating position, unless you object to the fact that the car's header rail is rather close to your eye line. As usual with this maker's sports cars, there are only 2 seats in a class where many rivals are 2+2s with tiny but useful rear pews. These front chairs are thankfully much better than the not especially comfortable ones fitted to the 750S and the old 570 GT. 10-way power operated and trimmed in soft grey Napa leather. But like the cabin ambience, they're not very GT-like, firmly padded in memory foam rather than feeling plush and luxurious. Still, interior quality is a big step forward from the old 570 model, helped by lashings of aluminium trim and tech touches like these Alcantara-covered A-pillars and the lovely Bowers & Wilkins speaker grills built into the sculpted door cards. You'd still find a Bentley Continental GT or an Aston Martin DB11 more luxurious, but the McLaren GT has a cosier and more intimate feel, which makes up for a lot. Around you, technology and modern craftsmanship share equal prominence. Fine, high-quality materials complemented by features such as evocative hidden until lit ambient lighting. Some of the trimming is a little on the gaudy side, like the machined aluminium trim on the bottom half of the steering wheel, but other machined and knurled aluminium highlights contrast nicely with satin black surrounds on the infotainment screen, the steering wheel clasp, window switches, the gear selection console and the air vent housings. A 12.3-inch TFT screen positioned directly ahead of the driver provides key vehicle information at a glance, dominated by a central circular rev counter within which there are gear ratio and speed readouts. To the right of this dial are temperature and tyre pressure readouts, while to the left of the central gauge is an area for selectable displays controlled by this lower left-hand steering wheel stalk. Vehicle info, trip data, phone settings and navigation. The TFT screen prioritises information depending on vehicle mode, but can also be configured manually. And along its bottom edge are your chosen handling and powertrain drive mode settings, plus ambient temperature and time. As for infotainment, well, the portrait-shaped 7-inch McLaren Infotainment System 2 screen that flows down from these two classy central silver trim vents is a lot more advanced than previous media systems we've seen from the brand. McLaren says it's driven by a 10-core superprocessor and works 5 times faster than the system in the previous 570 GT, with graphics and colours apparently inspired by the control systems of a luxury jet aircraft. Plus, there's media streaming, voice control and satellite navigation with HERE mapping and real-time traffic information. But none of that is enough to make this monitor's functionality anywhere near class-leading. Perhaps most significantly and almost unforgivably in this app-obsessed era, there's no Apple CarPlay or Android Auto smartphone mirroring system. The interface provided is designed to work like a smartphone in the way you pinch and swipe around it, and offers a home screen with the expected media, phone, navigation, audio and settings sections, plus 2 more you might not expect: home link and ambience. Plus, below the display are shortcut buttons for phone, audio mute and music on the right, and for navigation, settings and climate on the left. The latter ventilation screen in a typical McLaren touch, showing its occupant fully helmeted. That screen replaces all the usual ventilation knobs and buttons, but for use requires far too much of your attention away from the road. The Bowers & Wilkins sound system we referenced earlier works, of course, via this screen. This audio setup now standardised in this GT with a thumping 1200 watts and incorporating neodymium magnets plus speakers fashioned from Kevlar, including an artily undulating one integrated at the top of the dashboard. Storage space around the cabin is extremely limited, and of course there are no door pockets because of the raising dihedral door design. The glove box is a reasonable size though, and you get no fewer than 3 rather small cup holders, one between the seats and 2 more at the base of the centre stack. Plus, you can reach back into the luggage area behind for jackets and light bags. There's also a lidded box between the seats, optionally available with this branded leather top, within which there's a USB-A port. Let's finish with a look at boot capacity, accessed by a power-operated soft-close rear tailgate. Once it's raised, there's 420 litres of space available, thanks to the way the exhaust system's been reconfigured and the engine has been lowered. That capacity is pretty impressive for a McLaren, 200 litres more than the old 570 GT, and also more than something conventional like, say, a Mercedes AMG CLA 45 shooting brake. The problem with this area, though, is that it's shallow and awkwardly shaped. Fine for things like skis, snowboards or golf bags, but not much use if you're trying to take bulky suitcases. We'd say that the optional bespoke luggage set would be a must if you're not to end up sticking stuff in the front passenger footwell on longer trips. This luggage bay privacy cover is standard, and these near-essential tie-down straps aren't. Nor, by the way, are these smart, solid aluminium casted oil and water caps. At least items you store here won't get lightly fricasseed by the engine as you drive. Cooling air is fed between the load space and the engine compartment to avoid that, and several layers of foam isolate the engine still further. McLaren reckons you could even carry chocolate without it melting. Should that prediction prove false, you'll want to have chosen to trim this cargo area in this super fabric finish, which is a clever woven fabric infused with a layer of small armoured guard plates. The resulting surface is supposed to be quick drying, breathable and easy to clean, while also providing resistance to stains, cuts, nicks and abrasions. It certainly makes more sense than the other boot trimming option, semi-aniline leather. We haven't quite finished either, because there's also a further storage space in the nose. McLaren's thoughtfully provided an extra access button for it on the leading edge of the dihedral driver's door as you raise it. Raise the bonnet and the frunk space revealed is actually larger than the tapered nose leads you to expect, though it's rated at just 150 litres in size. The brand claims that 2 small overnight bags would fit there. A netted storage pouch is provided, as is a light and a 12-volt socket. And this area boosts this car's total luggage capacity up to 570 litres, which on the face of things vastly improves on what you get from class rivals. Though to be fair, many of those offer a lot of extra room on the small rear seats that this McLaren doesn't have. The McLaren GT might not cost quite as much as you expect. Think around £166,500 at the time of our test in spring 2023, which isn't much more than less exotic and heavier rivals like the Audi R8 Performance or the Porsche 911 Turbo S. At first glance, rivals like the Ferrari Roma, the Aston Martin DB11 and the Bentley Continental GT Speed don't appear to cost that much more than this McLaren, but once you spec like for like, take it from us, the price difference would be vast. Much of that is because, reacting to slow sales following this GT model's original 2020 launch, McLaren standardised 3 big options packages, all of which we have fitted here. There's the Luxe pack with soft semi-aniline leather for the upholstery and cabin trimming. The Premium pack with a 12-speaker Bowers & Wilkins sound system, adaptive headlights, cabin air purification and a powered tailgate. And the Practicality pack with a nose lift system for getting over speed humps, a rear view camera, all-round parking sensors, power folding mirrors and a luggage bay privacy cover. McLaren no longer requires GT owners to pay extra for a sports exhaust system either. The net result of all this is a saving to GT owners of around £35,000. Plus, this GT is pretty well specified to start with. The equipment list including leather upholstery, a 7-inch central infotainment screen and a 12.3-inch TFT instrument display. You also get big 15-spoke alloy wheels that are 20 inches at the front and 21 inches at the rear, with the rim finish available in silver, tungsten, gloss black diamond cut, or as here, in straightforward gloss black. Driving stuff includes grippy Pirelli P0 rubber, powertrain and handling drive modes, launch control, adaptive damping and carbon ceramic brakes featuring 390mm discs at the front and 380mm discs at the rear, paired with lightweight aluminium calipers, 6-piston at the front, 4-piston at the back. Of course, McLaren's hoping to get the money lost by standardising the packs we mentioned earlier, by tempting more owners with the extra cost options still available. The main one is probably this panoramic privacy glass roof, which costs another £2,100. You might also want rear privacy glass, and we'd recommend you add a luggage retention strap to the cargo area. As for aesthetic options, well, we've got the black pack fitted here, which applies that finish to the door mirror casings, the upper window surrounds, the wheel finishers and the exhaust finisher. If you'd prefer a different look, there are alternative bright pack or gloss carbon fibre pack colour styling options available. The roof can be gloss black painted, And there's an alternative 10-spoke alloy wheel design. Plus, you can have different coloured brake calipers, bronze or Speedline Gold, both finished, as here, with a silver machined McLaren logo. No fewer than 14 MSO or McLaren Special Operations division-defined paint colours can be specified to factory order. We've got one of them here, Helios Orange, costing a cool £7,500 extra. As for the interior, well, if you don't like semi-aniline leather, there's the standard cabin pack with Napa leather, or the Pioneer pack with Alcantara aniline leather mix. With all the three cabin packs, you can also add what McLaren calls the milled from solid aluminium pack we have here, which uses solid aluminium for the air vent bezels and for the engine's oil and water caps. Plus, you can have door sill finishes in aniline leather or carbon fibre, and seat backs in carbon fibre or gloss black. Also on this test car is an armrest with McLaren branding. Other key available options include a volumetric alarm upgrade and a vehicle tracking system. And near essential, in our opinion, given the shallowness of the boot, is the bespoke luggage set, handcrafted from the materials used in the cockpit. Comprising a cabin bag, a garment carrier and a golf bag, the luggage can also be colour matched to the interior. Customers wanting to create a truly one-off McLaren GT can take advantage of MSO's fully bespoke specification service, the boundaries of which are limited only by imagination and technical feasibility. In case you're interested, expect a combined cycle fuel economy figure of 23.7 mpg, while emissions are rated at 270 grams per kilometre, virtually the same as you get from a Porsche 911 Turbo. You might hope for more than that, given that the Porsche tops this McLaren's 1,530 kilogram curb weight by a full 110 kilos. To give you another point of comparison, the considerably heavier Bentley Continental GT Speed still manages 20.6 mpg and 311 grams per kilometre. Still, McLaren claims a 418-mile range from the 72-litre tank, which, refreshingly, seems to be a touch on the conservative side, given the fuel figures we've been achieving in this test. Drive with a very restrained right foot, and a touring range of around 500 miles might even be possible. Depreciation, though, often represents an even bigger wallet drain with super sports cars of this kind. It's probably fair to say that residual values for the old 570 GT were a bit softer than McLaren had hoped for, with some customers cycling through their ownership periods quite rapidly. Some grumbling about things like the car's infotainment system and lack of aural fireworks. Those issues have both been fixed now, and oversupply isn't going to be too much of an issue. But residual values still aren't great. Industry experts CAP expect this McLaren to be outperformed by a Porsche 911 Turbo in this regard in the short term, and by a Bentley Continental GT Speed in the longer term. Likely owners probably won't care a fig about any of this, but even they might notice the substantial 37% benefit in kind tax rating that this GT incurs, meaning hefty annual tax bills. Group 50 insurance means that buyers will be keeping their brokers in Beaujolais as well. Of course, many owners will acquire this McLaren as just one of a stable of models and will have negotiated their own multi-car deal with their insurer. Continuing with the bad news, you don't get the 7-year free servicing package that Ferrari offers, so you'll have to pick up the tab yourself for routine maintenance, which will be required every 12,400 miles or 12 months, depending on which comes round sooner. Every second year, the car will need a full oil change too. With expensive consumables and high labour rates, you'll certainly need to know what you're letting yourself in for. What else? Well, the paint surface is warranted for 3 years, visible cosmetic corrosion for 5 years, and perforation corrosion of the vehicle body is covered for 10 years. The GT is also eligible to be covered by the McLaren Extended Warranty, which can be purchased in 12 or 24-month periods to ensure the protection of a comprehensive McLaren warranty until the vehicle is 12 years old. If you've been waiting for a McLaren practical enough not to be merely a high days and holidays indulgence, then this isn't it. You'll need either the brand's forthcoming SUV or the future rumoured 2+2 model for that. But the GT certainly has its place in the range, usefully building on the rather compromised day-to-day usability of the old 570 GT and bringing the 4-litre twin-turbo V8 power plant from the 750S in a slightly more accessible price point. Critics will point out that the extra provided luggage space isn't especially usable, and if you weren't particularly bothered about baggage, you'd probably choose the brand's less compromised 750S model every time. But in the real world, even super sports car owners have to carry things, particularly if they're going to be able to use their machines comfortably on longer journeys. The McLaren GT allows you to do that without the usual compromises in weight and handling you'd find in a traditional Grand Tourer super sports car in this class. In terms of rivals, don't think Bentley Continental GT or Aston Martin DB11. We'd say an Audi R8 Performance or a Porsche 911 Turbo S is closer to what you get here. And for not much more than the cost of either of those two cars, this McLaren feels a good deal more exotic. The recent changes haven't altered its proposition much. It's still not a true GT, but it is a true McLaren. And that's what really matters.